So today we're going to be taking a look at two chapters. We're going to be taking a look at chapter 20 and chapter 21. So make sure you do read both of those. Chapter 20 is going to be all about the Industrial Revolution. And where do we see the Industrial Revolution begin? That would be Great Britain. So what are some of the things about Great Britain that allow the Industrial Revolution to take place in their country? First is going to be access to food. We talked about some of the food revolutions that have occurred previously. Basically, there's enough food now to feed a larger population. As the population of Great Britain grows, it leads to more kind of industrial workers and all those different kinds of things. So again, they have the physical masses to make industrialization work. The other reason why Great Britain is going to be so successful to kind of start the Industrial Revolution is their overseas empire, right? They have lots of colonies around the world, places to get natural resources from, customers to sell products to, and they're also, at the time of the Industrial Revolution, the leading cotton producer in the world. And that's going to be extremely beneficial because that's where they're going to make their money from. The other thing we see in Great Britain is entrepreneurs, right? People who are willing to risk their own wealth, to start businesses, to employ people. And again, these people are able to gain wealth when being successful, but you got to take that risk from the start. The other thing that's going to allow Great Britain to be very successful is, even though it is a very small island, they have lots of raw materials. The two biggest things a country needs for the Industrial Revolution is iron ore and coal. And Great Britain has literally tons of both of those products on their island, right? So again, this is going to allow them to tap into those resources. We talked about the idea of empire and the idea of having more customers. They also have the Navy to protect their shipping. Again, getting those products from point A to point B can be hazardous, but their Navy is there to protect them. So again, all of those things are going to combine to make Great Britain where we see the Industrial Revolution beginning. Now, a couple areas where the Industrial Revolution really takes off. First one we mentioned was in the cotton industry. So there's new inventions constantly being made that allow cotton to be produced in a quicker fashion. Things like the spinning jenny and other kind of tools or tricks of the trade that allow cotton to be mass produced. Again, we talked about the idea of the cottage industry, where people were making those products in their homes in kind of a smaller quantity. We're going to get away from that now. Now that we can mass produce these goods, we're going to physically build factories where people can go and actually work. So instead of doing the work at home, again, you're doing the work in a factory. The other thing that's going to be invented or kind of created at this time is the steam engine. Now, the steam engine was originally used to pump water out of mines, and again, it was incredibly effective at doing that. But what they quickly find is that the steam engine can be used for any application, right? Anything where you need something physically moved, this machine can work and work and work. Again, if you have humans doing it, they need a brake. If you have horses doing it, they need a brake. This machine will literally just run infinitely. And the other area we see a major change is in the iron industry. There's a new process that's invented that allows for iron ore to be turned into steel cheaper and quicker. And again, you have this iron now being mass produced, and basically everything's going to be made of iron, right? Bridges, buildings, anything like that. So again, the fact that you can mass produce this product quickly allows you to build things like that. So again, those are the major reasons why we see the Industrial Revolution happening in Great Britain. Now, all of this is only feasible because of transportation, right? It's great to have the raw materials, but if you can't get them from point A to point B, they are not serving you good in any way, shape, or form. So again, Great Britain has the means of mass production, the means of transportation. In 1830, we see the first commercial rail line open in Great Britain, and by 1850, there are over 6,000 miles of railroad track in Great Britain. Again, that's a tiny island with over 6,000 miles of track. So again, whether it's getting product to customers, whether it's getting raw materials to your factory, again, they have railroads, they have canals, they can put things on a boat and just go around the island and do their thing. Any of that is feasible, and again, it really allows for Great Britain to make products really, really quickly. Now, the way we kind of talked about this change occurring is that factories are going to be made. Again, instead of people working in their homes, producing a product, that product gets picked up, now we're going to have people leave their homes, go to a factory, and make the product. But this really throws people off. Again, this was a society where people kind of worked at their own pace, right? Most people that are going to work in the factories used to be farmers. You get up when the sun's up, you work, you take your lunch, you go stop working when the sun goes down. In the winter, maybe you work less. That's not how it works in a factory, right? You're there at a certain time, the whistle blows, you start working, and you work and work and work until that whistle blows again. and you do it day after day after day, summer, winter, fall, it doesn't make a difference. So again, it's really kind of a change in lifestyle for many people getting into this factory life. Now, one of the things that Britain wants to do is kind of show off all that they've accomplished, right? And in 1851, they're going to have the Great Exhibition. It's basically a way for Great Britain to show the world all of the things that they've accomplished, right? Through the Industrial Revolution, through their colonies. And what they do is create a giant 19-acre structure, which is made of all iron and glass, and 6 million people are going to tour this giant exhibition. So again, it's really a way for them to show off all the things that they've kind of sown from the Industrial Revolution. Now, clearly Great Britain is not the only place we're going to see the Industrial Revolution. It is going to spread. Obviously, Europe is right across the English Channel, so we're going to see it go there next. But it is very slow. Again, for Britain only being a few miles off the coast, it doesn't go there quickly. And one of the reasons is that British law forbid certain people from taking jobs in Europe, or certain pieces of information from going to Europe. Again, Britain is able to mass produce these goods. They have a monopoly on doing that. They want to make sure they keep that monopoly. So again, they're specifically limiting materials that go to Europe, technology that goes to Europe, and people that even go to Europe. The other major issue we see is the role that the governments play in allowing the Industrial Revolution to take hold. The British government is very hands-off, right? Start a business, here's a loan, be successful, make money, pay your taxes, that's all we ask of you. Other countries in Europe are still kind of in that absolutism phase, right? Everything goes to the king, everything goes to the government, and it really slows things down. So again, just the way in which the governments kind of micromanage the economies in many of these European countries isn't going to allow for the Industrial Revolution to move too quickly. But we do see it take off places like France, Belgium, Germany. Again, places that have similar natural resources to what we saw in Britain. Iron ore, coal, they're able to kind of mass produce these goods as well. Now, clearly we know the Industrial Revolution is going to end up in America. Again, by 1860, right at the start of our Civil War, our population has passed Great Britain. So again, more people living here. But we're spread out over a giant area. So it's going to take a little bit longer for our Industrial Revolution to kind of kick in, right? We have the raw materials, we have the populations, but they're super spread out, coast to coast. So again, it is going to be a little bit of a slower process. Again, you got a lot more men heading out west, men exploring, men homesteading. So a lot of what we see at the beginnings of the American Industrial Revolution is really women kind of being involved in that factory work. In fact, 80% of workers in the textile mills on the East Coast were women workers. So again, a lot of this is going to begin with female workers on the East Coast here in America. Again, it's not just a Western civilization thing, right? India, at the start of the Industrial Revolution, is a very comparable power. Again, huge population, natural resource, major cotton industry. They're actually producing more cotton every year than Britain is. But once Britain takes more control over India, Britain is specifically going to stop textile production in India, right? They take away the natural resources. All that cotton that's grown in India is now shipped back to Britain. The looms and the technology are basically destroyed. So again, India goes from a very comparable country that could have continued to grow with the Industrial Revolution into essentially a third world country that's reliant on Great Britain for all of their supplies. There are some other issues that we do see around the world at this time. For there being an Industrial Revolution, we mentioned the idea of having more food. That doesn't mean every place is being successful. For example, in Ireland at this time, we see the potato famine. Over 1 million people are going to starve to death, and 2 million people are going to have to flee that country looking for a better life, food, jobs, things of that nature, right? So again, the Industrial Revolution, usually very good for the countries that are experiencing it, not necessarily good for everyone around the world. So again, how does the Industrial Revolution change the way people live? Again, we talked about this idea of factories, right? So factories are being built and people are going to move to be closer to these factories. So we see the populations of cities beginning to rise. But these conditions are miserable, right? Cities are overcrowded, they're disease-ridden, there's no sanitary conditions, no sewers, no clean water. And again, all of these cities and all of these factories are burning coal. So the whole entire place is simply covered in coal dust. So again, it's physically dirty. Not even like, oh, that's kind of gross. Like, it's literally dirty. Everything is covered in a black soot 24/7 all the time. Now, eventually people realize that this is a terrible way to live. And those that are making money in the Industrial Revolution do begin to push for reforms, right? So healthcare, education, cleaning up kind of the slums and things like that. It does take a while, but we do see that this does come about eventually. So one thing that's kind of interesting about the Industrial Revolution is it really creates a middle class in whatever society it starts in, right? You have the people that are kind of owning and operating these factories, right? They might not necessarily becoming the richest people in the country, but they have a sizable income, right? They have a comfortable income. They're the middle class. Workers, we see women and children kind of growing in the number of them that are going to be working, right? So again, one thing they like to do is hire women because you can pay them less. So again, if your factory has women workers instead of male workers, you have less overhead. The other thing you see is children working, right? Again, you can pay them less, they're children, and quite frankly, there are just some things that little tiny children hands are better at doing than adult hands. So again, terrible working conditions, terrible situations, but you do see way more women and children getting into the workforce. All of these terrible conditions that people are facing, though, does lead to the rise of labor unions, right? And again, these labor unions are kind of organizing groups within those factories, trying to get better conditions, better pay, all those things. It does eventually lead to more government intervention and laws that are specifically passed to protect workers in that society. Moving on to chapter 21, what we're looking at is Europe post-Napoleon. So 1815, Napoleon loses at Waterloo, and the major European countries are going to get together at the Congress of Vienna. And their goal is to figure out how to shape Europe so that a continental war never happens again. And one of the things they do is kind of restore a lot of the monarchies around Europe, right? Very conservative monarchies that are able to kind of control their populations, not allow for revolution, not allow for revolt. And again, a lot of this is in direct result to what we saw in France. So again, France, we see the French Revolution. Other countries are scared by that. They don't necessarily want that to occur in their country. So again, with the help of the major European powers, monarchies are going to be put back into many of these countries. But Europe is not the only place we see revolution at this time. Latin America is also going to see this. Remember, during the Napoleonic Wars, the Spanish monarchy is eliminated, right? Napoleon's brother is running Spain at this point in time. So a lot of these countries that were still under Spanish control are going to rebel. There really isn't a government to try to put these rebellions down. And we see places like Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Chile, all gain their independence. A few years later, we see Mexico defeat Spain and gain their independence. Brazil is granted their independence from Portugal. So again, we basically see all of Central and South America gaining their independence at this time. But there is a little bit of a problem here. While they're not being specifically controlled by European countries anymore, their economies rely heavily on the European countries. Remember, these European countries were simply exploiting these areas for their natural resources. They weren't building factories there. They weren't establishing economies there. So yeah, the European governments have left, but no one can build anything there, which means they have to buy all of their products from European countries. So again, they're still very beholden, very reliant on these European countries to kind of run their economies for sure. Again, go back to Europe, we see that Europe kind of hated the revolutions that they were seeing if it was against them. Europeans were certainly willing to promote a revolution if they thought it benefited them. So for example, we see the Greeks. The country that we would call Greece had been under Ottoman rule for over 400 years. But again, the people of Greece are wanting to fight this. They're wanting to have a revolution. So the European countries are like, yeah, go for it. Start that revolution. Again, they don't like the Ottomans. This benefits them. So again, they're willing to support a revolution if it's in their best interest. Now, obviously, there's going to be some pushback on these incredibly conservative governments, right? Conservative, we mean limiting what people are allowed to do, what they're allowed to say, making sure that there's no dissent against the government. In Great Britain, we see mass protests against the government, again, complaining about what kinds of policies are being put in place. And again, the lower class are obviously kind of at the short end of that stick. France tries to re-implement a lot of their pre-revolution ideas, right? Absolutism, monarchies being in charge. Clearly, that's not going to make people happy. The 38 states that made up the old Holy Roman Empire are being monitored by Prussia and Austria, and any nationalism or revolution ideas get stamped out very quickly, right? So again, if there's a spot in Europe that's saying anything anti-government, crown, anything like that, again, you're seeing the major European powers come in and make sure that that gets put away before a full-fledged revolution can begin. The governments might not have approved of what people were doing, but again, within Europe, you're starting to see more liberal ideas come about. And again, maybe they're not being said incredibly loud, but you're getting more and more people thinking about them and talking about them. Now, when we see these liberal ideas come about, if it involves the economy, a lot of times we refer to it as laissez-faire, the idea that the government should not interfere with the idea of supply and demand, right? Let people make products, let people buy products, don't try to tweak the economy, you'll just mess it up. Right? Politically, when we look at these liberal ideas, it's the idea that the government should protect civil liberties, basic rights. Again, a government should be there to serve the citizens, not the citizens should be there to serve the government. One of the ideas we see growing at this time is the idea of nationalism, right? People begin to be a little bit more aware that, hey, we have a similar language, we have similar customs, we have similar beliefs. Why shouldn't we just unify? Why shouldn't we be our own independent country? So again, you start to see these ideas coming to the forefront as well. Now, what we also begin to see is the seeds are kind of the beginnings of the idea of socialism, right? Or providing for more equality in a society. And the ultimate goal of this is the utopian society, right? Everything's fair, everyone's treated equally. Again, that is the ultimate goal. Now, revolution does begin throughout Europe. So again, as much as Europe is trying to stop it, it's going to happen anyways. And we see this in France. I mentioned the French king is trying to re-implement a lot of the pre-revolutionary absolutism ideas. The French king is overthrown, and a new king is brought into place. But again, this new king comes in on the promise that he's going to abide by the Constitution, right? Like, we'll let you be the king, but there are certain rules you are going to have to follow. So again, we see kind of a shifting in who's in charge. Belgium, which isn't officially a country yet, is predominantly Catholic, and they're controlled by the Dutch Republic. So they actually get their independence, and we now have an independent Belgium. So again, we see some successes happening, but not everywhere in Europe is it going to be a success. For example, we mentioned in a previous chapter that Poland basically doesn't exist by this point in time, but people still consider themselves Polish. So again, with that idea of nationalism, again, people that consider themselves Polish begin to rise up. They want their own independent country. But again, that's going to be crushed by the Russians. Again, they don't want that to exist. That's their land now. They're not going to allow for any kind of dissent. Italy, we see the same kind of a thing. Again, we have all these different units within Italy. They begin to say, why don't we just be one Italian group? And again, that's going to be crushed by the Austrians. So again, a lot of places where we see this, these ideas of reform or liberalism are definitely stamped out. Kind of the opposite of this would be in Britain, right? When the citizens of Britain ask for things, because they have an established parliament, a lot of times laws are going to be passed that make the citizens happy, things like the Reform Act. So again, they don't have the full-fledged revolutions or maybe the level of violence we see in some of these other countries because they do genuinely have a government that provides services for them. Issues back in France, right? We put this new monarchy into place, but there's still problems. The citizens still aren't happy, and by 1848, the king is overthrown. They establish the Second Republic, and they actually have an election where they elect Napoleon's nephew to be in charge of the country. So again, we see a little bit more maybe of a democratic system emerging in that country as well. Now, what is happening in France inspires upheavals in places like Prussia and Austria. And again, the government starts to relent a little bit to the masses, right? We see Hungary gaining a bit more independence within the Austrian Empire. So again, we do start to see these countries acknowledging that if they don't give something up, they might lose everything. So again, how is culture impacted by these revolutions that are happening around Europe? One of the things we see, artistically speaking, is the romanticization. And again, it's the idea of using balance kind of with reasoning, feelings, emotion, imagination. So again, as people think maybe a little bit more outside the box, we see that in their artwork as well. Individualism becomes a little bit more in the forefront of art. Again, everyone has unique traits, and those traits should be celebrated. Again, we're not making people look exactly the same because people, quite frankly, don't. look exactly the same. And again, we see these ideas in the poetry, in the artwork, in the music that is being created at this time. All right, so that is our look at chapters 20 and 21.